We're experiencing a confluence of factors. We're seeing supply chain disruptions from the pandemic and the climate disasters. We're facing resource scarcity and coming very close to running out of certain materials. We're seeing an uprising of human rights movements. Just a lot of things have been brewing to make sustainable supply chains such an important topic.
Hello and welcome to the Next Level Supply Chain with GS1 US, a podcast in which we explore the mind-bending world of global supply chain, covering topics such as automation, innovation, unique identity, and more. I'm your co-host, Reed.
And I'm Liz.
And welcome to the show.
In today's world, we know that resources are becoming scarce and that topics like sustainability, circularity, recycling are all being discussed within organizations and around the dinner table. Reed, are you ready to talk about all things sustainable?
I am, very much so.
Awesome. So today I would like to welcome Vivian Tai. She is the Innovation Manager here at GS1 US, who is passionate about this topic around sustainability and circularity. Vivian, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're really excited. So let's get started. My first question is really around how often we hear about sustainability. We hear sustainability in so many different ways. What does it really mean, and why is it such a hot topic around the supply chain conversations?
Gosh, okay. So to answer this question, I'm actually going to refer to the seminal Brundtland Commission's report from 1983 called Our Common Future, because it famously defines sustainability, or rather sustainable development, as the ability to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And the truth is, in recent years, we've been seeing a lot of evidence that we're compromising the future availability of resources, compromising our ability to meet needs in general, and not just natural resources, but social resources as well. Sustainability is tied to environmental health as much as it is to social justice, where human rights and healthy working conditions are of top concerns. And so to answer why it's been such a hot topic in supply chains recently, it's largely because we're experiencing a confluence of factors. We're seeing supply chain disruptions from the pandemic and the climate disasters. We're facing resource scarcity and coming very close to running out of certain materials. We're seeing an uprising of human rights movements. Just a lot of things have been brewing to make sustainable supply chains such an important topic, because when you think about it, supply chains run the world. It's something that truly touches everyone on this planet at some point or another. And the exciting thing is that supply chains are actually a critical component to solving a lot of these problems.
Wow. That was a very profound statement there. There was so much in it to peel back. I wasn't expecting all of that, Vivian. I'm excited for the rest of our conversation here. There's so much to peel back. I think we might have to schedule another call, Liz.
I know. I had never thought about it from that perspective, where it's so many different pieces that have come together, from the supply chain to scarcity. But then really, supply chains do run the world. It touches every single one of us, like you said. And that was, I've already in the first 2 minutes had an aha moment. So that's just really cool.
Let's peel this back some more. And let's talk about it. I mean, Liz and I have talked in the past about supply chains not being linear, being more like a web.
Yes.
And, when you pull one lever, it impacts another lever. So, Vivian, give us your perspective, on supply chains and sustainability. And what does that really look like? What are things that should be considered? What are things that aren't being considered? How do you look at it today?
Yeah, so I really love that question, because I do believe that supply chains mirror the world in that it is interconnected. It is a series of webs and interconnections. And that is actually much like nature. So when we think about how we are, we focus or have focused so much on linear supply chains, it's really a reflection of our almost short-sightedness for the past, few decades. And I think the taking a step back and looking at how we can make our supply chains more sustainable and even more circular, that is looking at the bigger picture, looking at these interconnections and how we can actually be complementing all these various factors. So I first have to call out that there's a difference between sustainable supply chains and circular supply chains. You can be one or the other, and you can even invest the best of both cases, be both. But I would have to say that when we think about having sustainable supply chains, it's really actually about something that supply chain professionals are really familiar with. It's about managing inventory. When we start to think of inventory as resources as inventory, got the two mixed up. Yeah, when we start
I'm so glad that you said that, though, because as you were talking about this, I'm like, if we just keep peeling back what we do within supply chain, right? It's efficiencies, it's visibility, it's sharing information up and down, the stream. But when you start to look at it, like you mentioned it, it's a mirror of the world, much like nature, and it's a web. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is really profound today, Vivian. Keep going. So please.
No, it's totally, that's what it is. Like a lot of the things that we don't realize that we're doing or that we're taking for granted is because we're not looking at the whole system. We're just looking at disparate parts. So when we think about what it means to have sustainable supply chains, it's recognizing something for its entirety rather than its discrete part.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking just the other day with supply chain shippers and freights, and it was, you look at your carbon footprint and how much diesel fuel are we going to use. But if we looked at that more holistically, like all the way up to the raw material and where we're getting it, wow. My brain's hurting already, Liz. Like, I wasn't prepared for this today.
And I just want to ask you a question because you made a comment about sustainability and circularity not being the same thing.
Yeah.
So how do you then define circularity?
Yeah, so circularity is really focused on materials and resources, the reuse and ensuring that we're not wasting anything that we have in circulation right now. It's ensuring that we can extract the most value out of whatever resources we have. And it's about regenerating the earth. And a lot of my answer is, an amalgamation of different definitions around circularity, but at the end of it, it's not about like recycling. It's actually about like reducing the consumption, regenerating the earth or like the natural environment to the best of our abilities. And it's about extracting the most value we can out of what we already have taken out of the earth.
I mean, and then for sustainability, how does that differ from circularity?
Yeah, so sustainability, I would actually think about sustainability as kind of the umbrella term that which circularity can fall under. So when we think about sustainability more broadly, it's about how do we maintain our lives or how do we maintain like Earth in its most simplistic form. And so like when we think about sustainable supply chains, we have the various elements of like, how do we care for people? How do we care for the environment? How do we do all of these things in the most like minimally hurtful way as possible?
So these are huge and like I don't even know what the right word is because it's such a broad thing that you just said, right? Really hard to figure out how to even take the first step in sustainability and circularity. And I'm sure in the conversations that you've had around these topics, and knowing that like resources are finite. So from a brand's perspective, if we just take a brand's perspective, what are some of the things when you start taking small steps, you have this broad goal, what are some of those innovative things that you're seeing brands do to become more sustainable or have more circularity or to do things like minimize waste?
Okay, so there's like several questions rolled into that
I know,
one.
I'm sorry.
No. I think I will try to tackle it with what are some small steps that people can, or brands or companies can start to take, and then I'll answer the innovative things that I'm seeing.
Okay, cool.
So in terms of the first steps that brands and companies can take is it actually goes back to what I was saying earlier about treating resources or materials as inventory. Because when you have an effective inventory management strategy that encompasses resources, then you start to be able to value those resources and the components that go into making a product that you're managing. And suddenly you have an explosion of possibilities around demand forecasting, knowing when to make a certain amount of a product because you have such a superb handle on your resources. And really all of that starts when you, and I'm going to put my GS1 US hat back on a little bit, but like it really starts with having identification standards. It really starts with uniquely identifying things, having information standards so that you have visibility and traceability of the resources. Because if you have that, if you're able to assign that identity, that passport to a product or a component, then you can start to really allocate it effectively. And then as for the innovative things that I'm seeing, that I think some things that I've been really appreciating lately is that brands are offering packaging as a service. They're offering refill as a service. Some there are some technologies that are detecting spoilage before food gets to the point of being wasted. There's a lot of companies that are doing things to divert waste so that we can, get the benefit of a product for a little while longer. And I think that that's really important because that's kind of the first things that we need to do.
Yeah, we actually saw that with Strela Biotech, who
Yes.
won our startup lab pitch competition in 2021, and they were on their show and talking about, I think it was a third of all food is wasted before it's actually out there. So they created an IoT sensor to help understand when produce is starting to ripen and sharing that about. So that's an example of what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So let's change gears here just a little bit. How do you see sustainable supply chains actually impacting the consumer? Is this a burden? Is it better? Is it net neutral for the consumer? Does the consumer have to learn new skill sets? I mean, do things differently? And I say that very honestly here, because I can tell you in my household, tons of times they put things into the recycled garbage can and I'm like, it doesn't go in there. And they're like, what are you talking about? It's plastic. I'm like, that's not a recyclable plastic. So this is a deep question too, because there's a big impact on the consumer.
Yeah. So actually I was reading there was like a survey published recently that found that nearly 2/3 of Americans surveyed are willing to pay for more sustainable products. And according to that same survey, 78% of people are actually more likely to purchase a product that's clearly labeled as environmentally friendly. So there is that consumer demand driving it. People are more conscious about where their dollars are going towards. And I believe that people, in recognizing that a lot of our human consumption activities have been harming the earth and creating these negative impacts, we want to make a change no matter how small it is in the daily choices that we have. So I do see that there is not only in like the consumer end, there's a reflection from the industries to do better because they realize that they're actually contributing a lot to the problems. And I think so these past I would say 2 years since the pandemic, we've really seen an uptick in interest in being more sustainable.
And that actually leads me into my next question, which is around the pandemic, because I was curious to see if the sustainability circularity work had been accelerated. I know that, in 2020, there was probably a trajectory and everything changed. So has sustainability accelerated? Has it been bottlenecked? Or, how has this past weird 2 years impacted this work?
So actually, maybe in the early days of the pandemic, people had to shuffle a lot and deprioritize sustainability just for a little bit. But I would say overall, sustainability and the interest in it has definitely accelerated in the past 2 years, precisely because we're starting to look at it as part of the answer and really a necessity. And I would say that, it was bottlenecked before, maybe because companies didn't prioritize sustainability as a key to one of their holistic overviews of the problem. But aspiring towards sustainability to ensure a better future for everyone is definitely on a lot of major companies' minds. And I actually think that part of accelerating sustainable supply chains is we see that in focusing less on hyper efficiency and focusing more on resilience and adaptability. Those have been hot keywords in the past year, I would say.
Awesome. So let's talk about brands now and what brands can be doing to be more sustainable. I mean, are there some, low-hanging fruit or certain things that are more important than other things that brands should be considering when it comes to sustainability?
Yeah, I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I actually do really stand by having standards-based, unique identification. And this isn't just because I work at GS1 US, by the way. I believe this because it is a conduit to managing resources effectively. It helps us be mindful about the products that we have in circulation, and it helps us eventually bring it back into circulation for reuse in the future. So I really think that it starts with having identification, and it starts with valuing things appropriately.
Excuse me, Liz, let me just finish this thought. I was taking a note and trying to get my thought out there too, but it's interesting because I've been sitting on the Circularity Protocol Advisory Board, which is a group that's focused on apparel and circular economy. And right out of the gate, they had some folks that they were piloting it with. And the first thing that came in, Vivian, was what you talked about, which was identification. Mm-hmm. Some were using GS1 standards for identification. Others were using their own proprietary systems for identification, which were all well and good because they were closed-looped supply chains for themselves. They developed, manufactured, and distributed and sold, and everything was within their own environment. But now they want to be a part of the sustainable movement, and they want to be a part of a circular sustainable supply chain. So now they have to open up their closed environment, and they're starting to see that. So these are just some challenges right away. I mean, that was table stakes. That was one of the minimum things. Then it moved into conversations around raw materials, because in some industries we track raw materials, and in other industries we don't track the pure raw materials. And then when you get to tracking the raw materials, well, guess what? Their supply chains go to thousands of different verticals. I mean, just look at petroleum. Everyone, it's gasoline and it's oil and it's fuel. No, it's in our clothes, it's in our makeup, it's in our medicine, it's in our plastics, it's in everything, from different. So when you look at that as a supply chain, it's a significant web. So I didn't know if you had anything more to add on that, but when you said it, it felt like we're just plugging. But that I've experienced it firsthand, where people said, "Yeah, identification. We got to start there."
Yeah, no, I mean, I love that because I truly am a believer, even if I weren't working at GS1 US, because when you think about it, how do you have collaboration if you're not even communicating in the same language, right?
Right.
So it really, like, standards are a really important part of this industry, and I think we need to show more and more leadership and involvement, because this is important. This is table stakes.
Yeah, very much so for all of us as a human race.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And, we can do this. We know standards and we know the importance of identification. How do you then, as a consumer, how do we tell our friends and family, like, this is important? Reed mentioned, putting the recyclables in the recyclable, even if it isn't. So we have to keep the 7s away from the 2s, maybe. But how do we encourage more companies to get in front of this, to pilot, to use advanced data carriers? How do we help that movement go forward?
So I love that question, because as consumers, we make choices every day, and we are making a difference in that sense. And one of the things that I've been learning in school, I study sustainability, and basically there's footprints. So, like, of carbon footprints, which are the negative impacts and the negative emissions that we have in all the actions that we choose and the products that we buy. But there's actually something that's also called a handprint, which is the on the flip side of it, a positive impact that you can have on the world. So it's not to say that we will stop, emitting carbon emissions or whatnot, but it's about choosing to do better so that we can have this ripple effect. If we choose to, buy products that could be refilled and go to refill stations, we stop ourselves from having to buy new and having to, get put in demand for more things that need to be created. If we slowly convince our friends and families to get on this journey with us, I think that will actually speak really loudly to companies that, hey, we as consumers want more of these options available. We don't want to keep having to buy more and more like bottles of shampoo when we could actually just be refilling it at stations. Like, I think that is something that we as consumers can vote with our dollars on.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. And we're starting to see that, right? You started off in the very beginning with some of the statistics of consumers are willing to pay more for something that they know will be better for the environment. It's not just greenwashing, as they say. It's really kind of impactful. Okay. So we've already decided we're going to have another conversation. You're going to have to come back. We have a couple other little things to kind of get through today. And so moving away from sustainability, or maybe not, you might surprise us all, but we always ask all of our guests, what's the favorite technology that you're using today? Like right now, you've used it today or yesterday or this week, and it's just been your favorite technology that you've been kind of like wowed by lately. What is it?
This is going to sound really nerdy, but it's actually a software that tracks life cycle assessment and impact of different products and its components. It's called Earthster.
Earthster.
Earthster. So
Earthster.
I think that it's still in beta phase, but I've been using that just to, I've been working on projects using it, and I have been looking at what the impact of, various little products are, and doing kind of comparisons for, like, okay, so if I, make a certain product and have it be solar based instead of regular electricity, if that was an input instead of regular electricity, I should say, how much less impactful would this product be? So it's been really interesting, and I wouldn't say that this is something that everybody would find like great joy in using, but I have found a lot of fun using it.
I don't think it sounds nerdy at all. I think it sounds fascinating to be able to see what choices can mean down the road. That's awesome.
Yeah, and I was actually, you were thinking of, when you were saying it, I was thinking of your footprint and handprint.
Yes,
I'm like, oh,
exactly.
I wonder if so it does. So it kind of shows you like, hey, here's where you're making a footprint, but if you implement this handprint here, this is how it kind of like adjusts things.
So it doesn't show you your handprint. Like basically, that would require further analysis of like how you can make a better impact. And it doesn't make any recommendations, but it is basically it pulls from various databases, like the impact of a certain component or part of a product, and it actually tells you the inferred impact it has on human health, on the climate, on like a lot of different areas or factors. So I thought it was really interesting, and I was exposed to this mostly because I was I'm studying.
Right.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And like I said, that's not nerdy at all. And actually, it kind of wraps up the question, because that actually blew my mind, what you just said, that there is technology that they can give you that kind of output. But from your perspective, what blows your mind from a sustainability perspective?
Okay, so I have a not so fun fact to share, but this definitely blew my mind when I first heard it, and it's actually related to resource scarcity. So if we continue with business as usual, especially in the way that we've been consuming technology and getting more and more like hardware created, we will actually have less than 30 years of gold left. And that's similar to another element on the periodic table is silver. Silver is actually also at risk of running out. And there's actually a whole periodic table of elements that show up as let me rephrase that. There is a periodic table of elements out there that are classified by what's at risk of running out. And you'll see that actually most of the things that are at critical risk of running out are things that go into smartphones. So I can link you the periodic table if you're curious at looking at it. It's actually kind of a funky looking thing, very interesting. But there's only so many years of elements left. And that's kind of a scary thought, because once you run out of these critical materials, where does that leave the world? So circularity is going to really be an important factor to managing those resources.
I love the way you brought that home, though, and I would love it if you could share that link. We could post it with the podcast. But when you say periodic table, it brings me back to 7th and 8th grade. I had a very intense science teacher, and I still use a lot of his phrases today. And I had to actually memorize the periodic table of elements and numbers and masses and weights. And oh man, it was the first time I was introduced to oral exams standing up in front of the class. But when you brought it back to all the things that are in a cell phone, that's what hits home with consumers. That's what hits home with everyday people. And I know you kind of use the word doom and gloom, but I don't think it has to be doom and gloom, because sometimes when you look at things in doom and gloom, like, oh, well, there's nothing else to do, might as well just give up. But I think really what you're saying is we've identified it and we can do things and we can get better at it with an opportunity.
Yeah, actually, you'll find that most sustainability advocates are the most cautiously optimistic people you'll run into. Like they have a lot of hope, they have a lot of drive to accomplish things, and I would say they're the opposite of doom and gloom. It's really about looking at the problem realistically and then figuring out what we can do from there.
Yeah, and really impacting. Well, Vivian, We can't thank you enough for being on the show today. We will definitely have you back, and we would like to double down and talk about this a bit more. Just a couple of highlights from the show is supply chains are a mirror of the world. I love that, and I'm going to use that moving forward. And also, sustainability is its supply chain within itself. So we can implement our own expertise to help ourselves out and just refine this a bit more. I found that very profound. Footprints, we all know, are kind of your carbon footprint and could be a negative. So just put a little more handprints out there and get a little more hands-on with it, and the handprints will be positive. And then check out Earthstir was another one. So Vivian, thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining the Next Level Supply Chain with GS1US. If you enjoyed today's show, you can subscribe to our feed or explore more great episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to share and follow us on social media. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.